Norfolk coffee shop, right on time. Good. Let's get a table. The briefing is in an hour. We're ready. Let's get the team. Agreed. Wren Halloway?
Depends who's asking.
Lieutenant Commander Osei. Naval Special Warfare Command. We need you to come with us, now.
Her stomach dropped. 3 years of building ordinary life, the register, open taser, and a shattered Thessalonian sentence. Give me a minute.
We don't have a minute, ma'am.
Admiral is waiting.
Understood. Let's move. Right away.
She counts the register twice, not because the numbers are wrong, because her hands need something to do. Norfolk, Virginia, 6:40 in the morning. The coffee shop smells like burnt espresso and wet pavement, and Wren Halloway stands behind the counter, like she's always stood behind counters, steady, unremarkable, a ghost wearing an apron. Except she isn't unremarkable. Not really. Watch her long enough, and you'll see it. The way she never sits with her back to the door. The way her eyes catalog every face that walks in. Height, hands, gait. Before her brain even registers she's doing it. The way she times the drip of the espresso machine against her own pulse. Out of habit, the same way she used to time her breathing against a rifle's recoil. Old habits. The kind that don't fade. The kind that get buried instead. A Navy chief walks in for his usual black coffee. Doesn't know her name is anything but Wren. Doesn't know she once calculated wind drift at 1,100 meters with her father's voice steady in her ear. Doesn't know any of it. Nobody does. That's the point. She hands him his coffee. He tips $1 into the jar and calls her sweetheart, the way older men in this town always do. And she smiles the smile she's practiced for 3 years. The one that says ordinary. The one that says nothing to see here, and underneath it something colder watches him leave, counts his steps to the door, notes the way his right hand favors his hip, the way a man's hand favors a holster he isn't wearing today. She hates that she still does that. She does it anyway. Across the street, a man sits in a parked sedan with the engine running, has been sitting there for 11 minutes now. Long enough that some old, buried part of her brain has already logged his plate number without being asked to. Probably nothing. Probably a rideshare driver waiting on a fare, or a husband waiting on a wife running late for a flight out of Norfolk International. Probably. She watches him anyway, between customers, the way she watches everything, cataloging and dismissing and cataloging again, because that's the tax she pays for the 8 years she can't talk about. Vigilance without an off switch. A mind that never fully believes the war ended just because somebody told her it did. The sedan pulls away, eventually. Ordinary. Nothing. And she exhales, and doesn't notice she'd been holding her breath until it's gone. This is the part nobody tells you about disappearing. Not the paperwork. Not the new name on a lease agreement. The part where your body simply refuses to believe the danger is over. No matter how many quiet years pass. No matter how many sedans turn out to be nothing at all. The morning moves the way mornings move, a line of sleepy sailors. A woman with a stroller who orders the same oat milk latte every single day and never once looks up from her phone. A retired Master Chief who sits by the window for 2 hours nursing one cup, watching the harbor. The way men who've spent their whole lives watching horizons never quite stop watching them. Wren steams milk. Wren wipes counters. Wren exists inside a life built specifically to be forgettable, and some mornings, most mornings, she almost believes it's the only life she's ever had. Almost. Because underneath the apron, underneath the small talk, underneath 8 years of practiced forgetting, there's still a woman who can field strip a ruffle in the dark, who still wakes at 4 a.m. out of habit and lies there timing her own heartbeat, who still flinches, just slightly, every time a door opens too fast. She doesn't talk about those years, not to her roommate, who thinks Wren's quietness is just an introvert's quietness, not to her thesis advisor, who thinks the careful, clipped way Wren writes about ocean current models is just academic discipline, not to the barista who works the next shift, who thinks Wren is a woman who reads too much and laughs too little, and probably had her heart broken once, badly, by someone she won't discuss. Which is fine. Let them think that. Because the truth doesn't fit inside a coffee shop. The truth is a black site outside Kandahar with no name on any map. The truth is a call sign, whisper actual, spoken only inside secure channels that don't exist on any official roster, in any budget line, in any hearing room on Capitol Hill. The truth is a unit that operated so far outside the normal chain of command that half the Pentagon didn't know it existed, and the half that did wished it didn't. The truth is, Wren Halloway used to be someone the United States government called when nothing else worked, until it stopped calling, until the file closed, until a name was erased and a woman was reissued a new one, a soft one, a civilian one, and told to disappear into a life that looked nothing like the one she'd built with her own 2 hands and her father's voice in her ear. 3 years of that now. 3 years of pretending the rifle isn't still in the closet. When she was 17, Grant Halloway taught his daughter to breathe. Not the way civilians breathe. The way snipers breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, half a breath held between heartbeats, the whole body gone still as a held note. He used to crouch behind her on the range at the family land outside Chesapeake, his hand light on her shoulder blade, his voice pitched low the way a man's voice gets when he's teaching something that matters more than the words themselves. Let the rifle answer. Not fire, not shoot, answer. Like the rifle was a conversation, not a weapon. Like the target was a question, and the bullet was simply the truth arriving late. She was 17, skinny, stubborn. Better than boys twice her size, and she knew it, though she never said it out loud because he taught her that too. Quiet hands, quiet mouth, loud results. He taught her ballistics before she learned algebra properly, taught her that a bullet drops the second it leaves the barrel, and the whole art of the thing is convincing yourself otherwise long enough to compensate. He taught her wind reading off cattails, bending in the field behind the range. He taught her patience by making her wait, sometimes for an hour, in the wet grass, rifle steady, waiting for a shot that might never come. Discipline, he told her once, isn't about pulling the trigger. It's about not pulling it. Every soldier who ever got somebody killed pulled the trigger too soon. She remembers thinking, at 17, that her father was the strongest, steadiest, most certain man in the world. She remembers thinking nothing could ever move him. She was wrong about that. Not about the strength, about the stillness. Because underneath the calm, her father was carrying something even then. Something he never told her. Something that would take 8 years and a warehouse full of dead men to finally surface. She didn't know that yet. She was 17. She just thought she had time. There's one memory she comes back to more than the others. One she's never told anyone. Not her mother. Not the Navy psychologist who signed off on her fitness for deployment. Not a single soul in 8 years. A night in late autumn, cold enough that their breath fogged over the rifle scopes. Her father sitting beside her on an old wooden crate behind the house. Not looking at her, looking instead at the tree line, like he expected something to come out of it. If anything ever happens to me, he said, quiet, almost offhand, the way men say the things that matter most when they're trying not to make a big deal of them. You don't go looking for answers. You hear me? Whatever they tell you happened, you let it be the answer. Some doors don't open kinder on the other side. She'd laughed at the time. 17 years old, invincible, certain her father was just being dramatic the way fathers sometimes are. Nothing's going to happen to you, she'd told him. He hadn't laughed back. He'd just nodded, once, and gone back to watching the tree line. And she never thought about that conversation again, until the day a folded flag landed in her mother's hands, and single word of it as it came roaring back at once. Too late to matter, too late to ask him what he meant. Then he was gone. A training accident, they told her. An explosion on a range in North Carolina. Some catastrophic equipment failure. During a live-fire exercise nobody in the family was ever briefed on in detail, because that's how the military handles grief. In redacted paragraphs, in careful phrases, in "we regret to inform you," letters that never quite explain anything. Closed casket. Flag folded into a tight triangle and pressed into her mother's shaking hands on a gray morning that smelled like rain that never actually fell. Wren was 18. She remembers standing at that funeral in a black dress that didn't fit right, watching men she didn't recognize salute a box that might or might not have had her father inside it, and something inside her went very quiet and very cold and stayed that way for a long time afterward. She enlisted 3 months later. Her mother begged her not to, said she'd already lost one Halloway to this life, couldn't bear to lose another. Wren remembers holding her mother's hands and lying to her calmly, the way she'd later learned to lie to comms officers and foreign contacts, and eventually herself. "I just want to serve," she said. "That's all." Wasn't all. It was never going to be all, because somewhere underneath the grief was a colder, harder thing. A need to understand exactly what had killed her father. A need that no amount of grief counseling or gold star pins was ever going to satisfy. She got further than she ever expected. Further than her father. Even, in some ways, recruited out of basic by people who don't wear name tags, trained in facilities that don't appear on any base map, folded into a unit so quiet it barely had a name at all. Whisper Actual. 5 years of her life spent in places she still isn't allowed to name out loud. Doing things she still isn't allowed to think about in daylight. 8 years is a long time to disappear into. 5 of them belonged to the war. The last 3 belonged to the silence that came after. The unraveling came fast, the way these things always do. A mission that went sideways in a way that wasn't supposed to be possible. A leak nobody could trace. 2 dead operators whose names got quietly folded into other units' casualty reports, so the real story never had to see daylight. And then, 6 months later, a folder landed on a desk somewhere far above her pay grade, and Wren Halloway, Commander Halloway, by then, stopped existing. Not died. Something stranger than dying. Erased. Her service record sealed. Her rank stripped from anything searchable. A new identity built for her overnight by people who were very, very good at building identities, complete with a fake undergraduate transcript and a manufactured love of deep-sea thermal vents that 3 years later had somehow become genuinely true. Nobody told her why. Nobody ever tells you why. That's the deal. That's the whole architecture of that world. You disappear when you're told to disappear, and you don't ask questions, because the people who ask questions in that world tend to disappear a second time, permanently, and nobody folds a flag for them. She remembers the day it happened with a clarity that still surprises her. A gray conference room with no windows. A man in a plain suit who never gave her his name, sliding a folder across a table, exactly the way Nolan would slide one across a different table 3 years later. Except this folder held her own death sentence instead of her father's. New identification. A new social security number. A single page of instructions on how to become someone else, effective immediately. No appeal process. No explanation offered beyond 4 words that have haunted her every day since. "This is for your protection." She'd asked, of course. Protection from what? From whom? The man in the suit had simply looked at her, patient and immovable as stone, and said the same 4 words again, slower this time, like repetition might make them mean something. She'd stopped asking after the 3rd try. You learn, eventually, in that world, which doors are actually doors, and which ones are just very convincingly painted walls. So she took the new name, took the new life, took the coffee shop job, and the graduate program, and the careful, colorless routine of it, and she buried Commander Halloway somewhere underneath 3 years of oat milk laddies and ocean current models, and some mornings she almost forgot the woman had ever existed at all. Almost. The night before, she'd sat on the fire escape of her apartment, with a beer going warm in her hand, watching a formation of growlers cut across the darkening sky toward Nass Oceana, and she'd counted them out of habit. 4. In a staggered echelon, running a training pattern she could have plotted blind. Her roommate Dana had leaned out the window behind her, laughing about some disaster of a first date, and Wren had laughed along at the right moments, made the right sympathetic noises, and the whole time some other part of her mind had been somewhere else entirely, tracking engine noise, counting seconds between passes, doing math nobody in that apartment would ever understand. "You okay?" Dana had asked, catching something in her face. "You get quiet sometimes, like you're somewhere else." "Just tired," Wren had said, the old answer. The only answer she ever gave. Dana hadn't pushed. Dana never pushed, which was exactly why Wren had chosen her as a roommate 3 years ago, out of a stack of strangers on a housing board. Someone kind enough to worry, incurious enough not to dig. It was a small, ugly little calculation to make about a person who'd become, against all odds, something close to a real friend. Wren hated that part of herself sometimes. The part that still ran background checks on kindness. She'd gone to bed early, hadn't slept well. Never did, the nights before something in the air felt wrong. Though she'd told herself for 3 years that feeling was just leftover static from a life she wasn't living anymore. Turned out the static wasn't leftover after all. The bell above the door jingles at 7:02. She doesn't look up right away. That's the training too. Never react first, always SS first. But something in the air shifts before her eyes even land on the door. A change in the room's pressure. The way a room changes when the wrong kind of person walks into it. 2 men in service uniforms. Not customers. Not regulars. Their eyes find her immediately, like they already knew exactly where to look. Which means somebody told them exactly where to look. Which means somebody has been watching this coffee shop long enough to know precisely which register she'd be standing behind at 7 in the morning. Her stomach drops. Wren Halloway. She sets the coffee pot down slow. Too slow. Buying herself a half-second she doesn't need and can't afford. Because half a second isn't going to change whatever's coming through that door behind these 2 men's eyes. Depends who's asking. The taller one doesn't smile, doesn't blink either. Lieutenant Commander O.C., Naval Special Warfare Command, we need you to come with us. And there it is. The floor tilting under a life she spent 3 years pretending was solid. I think you have the wrong person. We don't. Because they never do. Because men like this don't walk into a coffee shop in Norfolk at 7 in the morning unless the wrong is already gone, already burned, already bleeding somewhere off the coast. Because nobody sends 2 officers in dress uniforms to fetch a barista unless the barista used to be something else entirely and somebody just remembered it. She untied her apron with hands that didn't shake. Small mercy. Give me a minute. The shorter officer glances at his watch, and something about the gesture, small, clipped, urgent, tells her more than his words ever could. We don't have a minute, ma'am. The car ride is silent, which is worse than talking. Silence gives the mind room to run, and hers runs fast, cataloging every possible reason 2 Navy officers would pull a ghost out of retirement before her second cup of coffee, a leak in her cover, a resurfaced enemy from the black site years. A mistake, someone confusing her file with another Halloway, though there is no other Halloway, not one who ever wore that call sign. None of the reasons are good. She watches Norfolk blur past the window, gray water, gray sky, the masts of destroyers stitched along the horizon, like a seam that never quite closes. And she thinks about her father's voice. Let the rifle answer. Except there's no rifle here, just a black SUV, and 2 men who won't meet her eyes in the rearview mirror, and a growing, gnawing certainty that whatever's waiting for her at the end of this ride is going to cost her the careful, colorless life she spent 3 years building brick by brick, until the SUV turns through a checkpoint she's cleared through 100 times, in another life, in another name, and the guard at the gate doesn't even glance at her, doesn't recognize the ghost sitting 3 feet away in the back seat, until it doesn't stop at the visitor's building the way it should, till it drives straight past 2 guard posts that should have stopped it, waved through by men who seem to already know exactly who's in the vehicle, and doesn't slow down until it reaches a hangar at the edge of the base she was told 3 years ago no longer existed for her. A hangar with no markings. A hangar that isn't on any public map of Naval Station Norfolk, tucked behind a maintenance yard nobody without clearance ever has reason to drive past. Her chest tightens, because that hangar isn't supposed to be here anymore, because neither is she. The SUV stops. Nobody moves for a second. O.C. finally turns in his seat, and for the first time since the coffee shop, something almost like sympathy crosses his face. For what it's worth, he says, I read your file this morning. The parts they let me read. A pause. I don't know what you did out there, Commander. But whatever it was, 2 men are alive right now. Who wouldn't be if you hadn't done it? She doesn't answer. Doesn't trust her voice not to crack around a rank she buried on purpose. Spoken now for the first time in 3 years by a man she's known for exactly 40 minutes. The door opens. Cold air rushes in, smelling like jet fuel and rain. Let's go, O.C. says. They're waiting. The walk from the SUV to the hangar door is short. 40 yards, maybe. It feels longer. Her boots, her own boots, civilian boots, not the ones she used to wear, hit the tarmac in a rhythm that some old part of her brain automatically squares off into a march cadence she hasn't used in 3 years. The smell hits her before anything else does. Jet fuel and hydraulic fluid, and the particular ozone tang of radar equipment running hot. A smell she associates so completely with a version of herself, she buried that for one disorienting second, the whole world seems to fold backward. And she isn't in Norfolk anymore. She's 23 again, stepping off a transport in a country she still isn't allowed to name. She blinks it away, forces herself back into her own body, her own boots, her own life. Except it isn't quite her own life anymore, is it? Not since O.C. called her commander in the SUV. A guard at the hangar's side door checks her against a manifest that shouldn't have her name on it, not the real one, and yet there it is. Halloway, W, typed into a system that erased her 3 years ago and just quietly, efficiently brought her back without asking permission. She doesn't say anything. There's nothing to say that wouldn't sound like fear. Inside, it's chaos wearing a uniform. Radios overlapping. 3 different voices talking over each other, in the clipped shorthand of people trained never to waste a syllable. Screens throwing green light across 24 tense faces. A wall of Vasa. Coordinates. A red blinking dot 40 miles off the coast that everyone in the room is staring at, like it might stop blinking if they just watch hard enough. Like willpower alone might drag 2 dying men back to shore. Wall clock reads 0743 was. Someone has scrawled the coordinates of the last known position on a whiteboard in red marker, underlined twice, like underlining might make the numbers hold still. An intelligence analyst in the corner is running facial recognition against grainy satellite stills of the intercepting vessel, muttering to himself every time the software returns nothing useful. Nobody looks up when Wren walks in. Everybody's too busy watching the clock lose. Woman in a flight suit turns first. Captain Delgado. Dark hair pulled back tight, exhaustion carved into the lines around her eyes. The particular exhaustion of someone who's been awake since a phone call ripped her out of sleep hours ago. Wren doesn't know the name yet, but she'll learn it fast, the way you learn the names of people who end up deciding whether you live or die. You're Halloway? I used to be. You still are. We need you to be right now, more than you've needed anything in your life. Ping, pong, no time for anything softer. What happened? Delgado doesn't blink. SEAL, Team 2. Recon Op, 40 miles out. They walked into an ambush that shouldn't have been possible. Coordinated, precise. Using a communications protocol that's been dead for 3 years. Wren's mouth goes dry. Dead how? Dead like. Decommissioned. Encrypted with a key nobody's used since the unit that built it went dark. Since her unit went dark. Since Whisper Actual stopped existing on paper and started existing only in the version of Wren Halloway that pulls coffee shots 6 days a week and answers to a name that isn't hers. That's not possible. That's what everyone in this room said an hour ago. Then 2 men start bleeding out on a boat we can't reach, and the only frequency that'll cut through the jamming is one nobody alive is supposed to remember. Except somebody does remember. Her. Delgado waves over a younger officer clutching a tablet like it might explode. This is Ensign Park. He's been trying to raise the team on every channel we've got for 40 minutes. Nothing's punched through. Park looks at Wren the way you look at something you've been told is a legend and don't quite believe is standing in front of you. I'm really late for whatever this is, Wren says. Show me what you have. He does. A screen full of static, interrupted only by the occasional garbled fragment of a voice too far underwater in noise to make out. A jamming signature that Delgado's team has been fighting for the better part of an hour. Sophisticated enough that Wren recognizes the shape of it immediately. Not military grade, off the shelf, but something closer to what her own unit used to build. Custom. Precise. Which means whoever set this ambush didn't improvise the jamming. Which means they had help from someone who understood exactly how Whisper Actual used to operate. The thought lands cold in her stomach, but there's no time to sit with it. Not yet. Not with a red dot still blinking 40 miles offshore. Talk to me about the team, Wren says, eyes still on the screen. Who's out there? Park swallows. 2 operators. Petty Officer Coyle and Lieutenant Marsh. Recon, like Captain Delgado said, supposed to be a quiet insertion, observe and report on some smuggling activity off the coast. Nothing that should have required backup. He hesitates. They didn't even have air support tasked until the distress call went out. That's part of why command's scrambling. Nobody expected this to turn into a fight at all, which means whoever set this up knew the mission profile in advance. Knew it well enough to know exactly when the team would be most exposed, least supported, furthest from help. Which means this wasn't opportunistic. This was planned around a hole in the schedule that almost nobody outside a classified briefing room should have known existed. Wren files that thought away, cold and precise, the way she used to file every uncomfortable fact in the field. Acknowledge it. Hold it. Don't let it slow your hands. Park pulls up one more file before she can stop him. A personal roster. Old, faded at the edges of the scan, the kind of document that shouldn't exist anywhere outside a locked archive. Whisper actuals, original operator list. Her own name near the top, marked with a status code she doesn't need translated. And 3 lines down, a second name that makes her chest go tight in a way the ambush itself never managed. Reyes, N. Status, deceased. She looks at it for exactly 1 second too long. You okay? Park asks, noticing. Fine, she says. Too fast. Old ghosts. She pushes the thought down where it belongs, files it beside every other name on that list. She isn't ready to grieve out loud in a room full of strangers. There will be time for ghosts later. Right now, there's only the math. Get me the intercept vector, she says. We can be angry about how this happened after they're both breathing. They put her in front of a comms terminal, like it's the most natural thing in the world. Like 3 years hasn't happened. Like her hands haven't forgotten. Except they haven't. And that terrifies her more than the blinking red dot ever could. Her fingers move before her brain catches up. Frequency, cipher. The old cadence coming back into her mouth like a song she swore she'd never sing again. Muscle memory older than the coffee shop. Older than the fake transcript. Older than 3 years of careful forgetting. Whisper actual, this is. She stops. Swallows. Some part of her still expects her voice to fail on the name. And it doesn't. This is Halloway. Requesting confirmation. Static. Then a voice, young, scared, half-drowned in gunfire and wind noise. Whisper that. Confirm ID over Bravo 9er Echo 7. Confirmed. A beat of silence on the other end that says everything. Because that code hasn't been spoken aloud in 3 years. Because the last person who spoke it, according to the official record, died in a training accident that Wren has never once believed. Not for a single second, not even at his funeral. Jesus, the voice on the radio breathes. It's really you. There's no time to unpack what that means. Because the red dot is moving and 2 men are dying, and somewhere above the Atlantic a pair of F-18s are burning fuel, waiting for coordinates that only Wren's brain, trained by a dead man on a range in Chesapeake, can calculate fast enough for it to matter. I need the last known position, she says. And wind data. Now. Delgado slides a tablet across the table. Wren's eyes move across the numbers the way they used to. Fast, certain. The years falling away like a coat she didn't know she was still wearing. Coordinates. Sea state. A crosswind report from a weather buoy 12 miles off the intercept point. Wind speed. Drift. Elevation. The math builds itself behind her eyes before she even finishes reading the numbers. And for one strange, terrible second, she feels her father's hand on her shoulder blade again. Feels 17 years old and 7 feet tall, and utterly certain in a way she hasn't felt in 3 years of pretending to be someone smaller. Let the rifle answer. Vector 310. Adjust for crosswind. 15 knots, gusting. Tell the pilots to hold their line until I say cut. She runs the numbers the way her father taught her to run them on paper, long before any computer ever did it for her. 'Cause computers fail, he used to say, and hands don't. Not if you've drilled them enough times to forget they're even thinking. Range to target. Closing speed of both platforms. The curvature correction that most operators forget matters at all until it costs them a kill they should have made. She factors humidity off the coastal report. Factors the salt-heavy density of Atlantic air against a standard atmospheric model, adjusts for a target moving on an intercept course rather than a fixed point. It isn't a rifle shot. It's a missile solution relayed through a human voice instead of a targeting computer, but the bones of it are the same bones her father drilled into her on that range in Chesapeake. Read the wind, read the target. Trust the math more than the fear. Delgado stares at her. You're not cleared for. Then unclear me later. Right now those men need someone who can do this in her head faster than your system can do it on a screen. Ping, pong, no apology in it. None needed. Delgado holds her gaze for one long second, measuring her, weighing 8 years of buried rank against the 2 men bleeding out on the water, and then keys the radio. Do what she says. Somewhere in the back of the room, an older officer, Wren, hasn't been introduced to leans toward a colleague and mutters something that carries just far enough for her to catch it. Who the hell is she supposed to be exactly? Exactly the question, his colleague mutters back. Above both our clearances, apparently. Wren doesn't turn around. Doesn't have the luxury of caring right now what a room full of strangers thinks of a ghost they've never heard of. There will be time for that later, for the stares, the questions, the slow unraveling of exactly how much of her old life just walked back through a door she thought she'd locked for good. Right now there's only the math, only the wind, only 2 men on a boat 40 miles offshore who don't care who she used to be, only that she's right. She's right. She has to be right. The room goes quiet. In a way, rooms only go quiet when lives are actually on the line. Wren's voice fills it instead. Steady, clipped, a language she thought she'd buried with her father, resurfacing whole and intact like it had been waiting under her skin the entire time. Cutter 2, come left 10 degrees. Hold. Hold, wait for my mark. Somewhere above the black water, a pilot she's never met is trusting a stranger's voice with a decision that can't be unmade. She pictures him up there, HUD glowing green across his visor, hands steady on the stick, waiting on a word from a woman he's never seen and will probably never meet. Park mutters numbers under his breath, cross-checking her math against the system, and every few seconds his eyes flick up to her face like he's trying to catch the mistake he's certain must be coming. It doesn't come. Mark. The room holds its breath. Nothing happens. 1 second. 2. The silence stretches long enough that Park's hand hovers over the abort key, long enough that Delgado's jaw tightens, long enough that Wren feels the old familiar cold spread through her chest, the cold of a calculation that might have been wrong, of a mark called too early or too late, of 2 men who might have just died because she trusted 8-year-old muscle memory over a system she no longer understood. Then, static. Then, cheering. Real, ragged, relieved cheering, crackling through the radio like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Splash. Vessel down. Both our guys are alive, I say again. Alive. Somebody in the room actually claps. Delgado doesn't. Delgado is staring at Wren like she's trying to solve an equation with too many missing variables, the kind of stare that says, who exactly did I just let touch my comm system? Wren just sits there, hands trembling now that it's over, because that's how it always goes. Steady during, shaking after, and for the first time in 3 years, she lets herself feel exactly how much of herself she buried in that coffee shop apron. Park is the first one to say anything to her directly. He crouches down beside her chair, voice low, like he doesn't want the rest of the room to hear him admit it. I've run through hundreds of intercept sims in training, he says. Never seen anyone call one that clean under that kind of pressure. Not even close. I had good training, Wren says. Must have been some instructor. She almost smiles. Almost. He was. Because her father never got a citation for the men he trained, who went on to do the things they did in rooms nobody will ever hear about. Never got a public accounting of what he built into her, piece by piece, on a wet range behind a house in Chesapeake. Just a training accident, a closed casket, a flag folded into a triangle. If Park only knew, if anyone in this hangar knew. She thinks, briefly, of the coffee shop, the register she'll need to explain missing shifts for, the roommate who'll wonder why she didn't come home, the whole careful architecture of an ordinary life she built specifically so no one would ever look at her twice. All of it feels very far away right now, on the other side of a line she just crossed without fully deciding to. She wonders if she can ever go back. She wonders if she wants to. The radio crackles once more, a new voice this time. Older, male. A pilot's voice, thick with something that isn't quite disbelief and isn't quite awe. Command, this is Falcon 2-1. Just want it on record. A pause. like even he can't quite believe what he's about to say. That was the cleanest intercept solve I've hard called in 15 years of flying. Whoever's on that mic, he pauses again. Wren's stomach drops before he even finishes. Tell the commander thank you. Commander. The word lands like a hand closing around her throat. Because nobody's called her that in 3 years. Because she buried that rank the same week she buried her father's memory. Folded it into a box in the back of her closet next to a rifle she can't bring herself to sell. Because commander belongs to a version of her that was supposed to be gone. Erased. Reissued into someone smaller, someone's fur. Someone who pulls espresso shot thensons and never, ever picks up a headset again. Except she just did, and a pilot 40 miles offshore just said the word out loud, into an open channel, in front of a room full of people who are now looking at her like the floor just opened up beneath all of them at once. Delgado is watching her face now, watching it very, very carefully. You want to explain, Delgado says quietly, why a Navy pilot just called a barista commander? Wren doesn't answer right away. Because the answer isn't small. Because the answer has a father in it who might not actually be dead the way everyone insists he is. Because the answer has a black site and a call sign and a version of herself she buried on purpose. And somewhere in the last 20 minutes that woman climbed back out of the ground and picked up a headset like she'd never left. It's a long story, Wren finally says. Delgado's eyes don't move off her. Then you'd better start telling it. Because whoever used that dead frequency to set this ambush knew exactly who they'd have to pull out of hiding to stop it. Wren feels something cold settle low in her stomach. A feeling she recognizes from years spent reading rooms exactly like this one. The feeling of a trap closing, slow and deliberate, around a woman who thought she'd already paid whatever the world was going to ask of her. Delgado slides a fresh printout across the table, the jamming signature analysis, the one Park flagged an hour ago, the one Wren already suspected without needing the paper to confirm it. Our engineers say this jamming pattern is custom built, Delgado says. Not standard issue, not something you buy off a black market shelf. Somebody with real resources built this specifically to punch through military channels and leave exactly one door open. A pause. Your door. Wren stares at the printout. At numbers that mean nothing to most people in this room and everything to her. Because she recognizes the architecture underneath them. Recognizes it the way you recognize your own handwriting on a page you don't remember writing. Because it's close. Too close. Close enough to whisper Actual's old encryption signature. That it isn't a coincidence. Isn't a lucky guess by some outside adversary. Whoever built this either trained inside her unit or trained someone who did. I need everything you have on this ambush, Wren says. Every log, every transmission, starting now. Delgado studies her for a long moment, then nods once, slow, like she's just decided something she can't take back. She reaches into a second folder, pulls out a single sheet, slides it across the table almost as an afterthought. There's one more thing, Delgado says. The vessel we splashed. Before it went down, it broadcast a partial registry ping. Automated system, probably meant to stay quiet, glitched under the strike. We only caught a fragment. She taps the paper. Enough to trace the hull back to a maritime logistics company, registered out of a shell address in Delaware. We're still pulling the ownership chain. Wren looks down at the fragment. A few characters. A partial name, cut off mid-word. The kind of clue that means nothing yet and will mean everything later. Keep pulling, she says. I want the full name by morning. There's a process for this, Delgado warns. Reinstatement, even temporary, means paperwork above my pay grade. Command's going to want answers about why a decommissioned operator just ran an active intercept off the books. Then, give them answers, Wren says. Tell them I saved 2 lives in under 10 minutes with nothing but a wind report and a memory. Tell them whoever set this trap knew exactly who they needed to draw out, which means they've been watching me a lot longer than today. And tell them if they want this stopped before it happens again, they don't have the luxury of running me through 6 weeks of bureaucracy first. Delgado's mouth twitches, not quite a smile, but close. You always this persuasive? I used to be a lot worse. Delgado actually laughs at that, short and surprised, like she wasn't expecting a ghost to have a sense of humor left. It fades fast, replaced by something more serious, more searching. "I'll make the calls," she says. "But you should know, once this starts moving up the chain, there's no quiet way to put it back. People are going to want to know why you were erased in the first place. People who might not like the answer." Wren holds her gaze steady. "Let them ask." "You'll have it," Delgado says. "Get some rest, Commander. Something tells me you're going to need it." Wren almost laughs at that. Rest. As if sleep is still a thing available to the version of herself that just spent 20 minutes remembering exactly how to end a man's life from 400 meters without flinching. "Welcome back, Commander." And there it is, the floor tilting again, further this time. Because this wasn't an accident, because somebody wanted her found. Outside the hangar, dawn has fully broken over the water, gray sliding into gold along the horizon. Destroyer masts catching the first real light of the day like nothing in the world has changed since yesterday. Wren stands in the doorway for a moment, watching it, feeling the strange, vertiginous pull of two lives trying to occupy the same body at once. The barista who was supposed to disappear, and the commander who apparently never really did. She doesn't know yet how much this morning is going to cost her. Doesn't know about the photograph waiting in a folder 2 days from now. Or the man with a scar on his jaw, who isn't as dead as she's spent 3 years believing. Or the father whose voice she can still hear on a wet range in Chesapeake, closer to the surface than she's let herself admit in a very long time. She only knows one thing for certain, standing in that doorway with the sun coming up over water full of secrets. Whoever set this trap wanted a ghost. They just got a commander instead. 3 hours later, Wren is still wearing yesterday's clothes and somebody else's clearance badge. They don't let her leave. Not really. They call it consultation. She calls it what it is, a leash with better manners. A windowless room somewhere deep inside a building that officially doesn't process visitors. A cup of coffee she didn't make herself, which feels wrong in a way she can't quite name, like drinking out of someone else's mug. And a folder on the table in front of her that nobody will let her open until Delgado walks back through the door. Wren doesn't touch the folder. She stares at it instead, because staring costs nothing. Because touching it means admitting she's already back inside, a world she spent 3 years trying to climb out of, one careful, colorless day at a time. She thinks about Dana, probably awake by now, probably texting a string of unanswered questions into a phone Wren left charging on her nightstand. She thinks about the coffee shop, about a manager who's going to want an explanation for a no-call, no-show that doesn't exist in any story she's allowed to tell. She thinks about all the small, ordinary threads of the life she built, and how easily, how instantly, they all went slack the moment a pilot said the word commander into an open channel. Someone brings her a change of clothes eventually, plain civilian slacks, and a gray sweater, nothing that marks her as anything, which she finds almost funny given everything else that's happened this morning. As if clothing could still make her ordinary, as if the problem had ever been what she was wearing. She catches her reflection in the window glass while she changes. Tired eyes. A face that's aged exactly the way an ordinary graduate student's face should age, except for something underneath it that no amount of oat milk lattes ever managed to soften. She barely recognizes the woman staring back. Not because she looks different, but because for the first time in 3 years, she's looking at herself and seeing Commander Halloway looking back instead of Wren from the coffee shop. She isn't sure yet which version of herself she wants to keep. The door opens. Not Delgado. A man. Broad shoulders gone soft at the edges the way men go soft when the war stops needing them. Salt through his beard that wasn't there before. Or maybe it was, and she just never had reason to notice it going gray. A scar along his jaw that Wren recognizes before she recognizes the face, recognizes it the way you recognize a scar on your own hand. Her whole body goes still, because she knows that scar, because she watched it happen, because she held pressure on that jaw with her own hands in the back of a truck outside Kandahar, while a medic screamed at her not to lose him. While the truck bounced over ground that felt like it was trying to shake them both apart, while she counted his pulse out loud, just has something to do with her voice besides scream. Because Nolan Reyes died in that truck, or should have, was supposed to have, according to every piece she was ever shown. She stood at his funeral, empty casket, same as her father's, folded flag, same as her father's. A whole life of empty caskets and folded flags, and here he is, standing in a doorway in Norfolk, very much not dead, very much staring back at her like the ground just moved under both of them at once. Wren. Her coffee cup hits the table harder than she means it to. You're supposed to be dead. Yeah, ghost of the old smile. Tired around the edges now, worn thin the way a coin goes smooth from being carried too long in someone's pocket. You too. Ping. 3 years, Nolan. Pong, I know. 3 years I stood at your grave. 3 years I put flowers on a headstone with your name carved into it, in a cemetery in Delaware, next to 100 other headstones for people who probably aren't dead either. I know that too. You could have. She stops. Starts again. Can't find the shape of the sentence because there isn't a shape big enough for it. You could have told me. Could I? His voice isn't cruel. Just tired. Just heavy with the same weight she's been carrying alone this whole time. Except now she realizes she wasn't carrying it alone. She was just the only one who didn't know she had company. Same people who erased you erased me, Wren. Different box. Same lid. I didn't get a vote on whether you found out. Neither did you. Which is worse somehow. Not that he lied. That the lie wasn't even his to tell. She looks at him for a long moment, cataloging the changes the way she catalogs everything. The new lines around his eyes, the way he favors his left leg slightly when he shifts his weight, some old injury she doesn't recognize, earned somewhere in the 3 years she thought he'd already been in the ground. A whole life she doesn't know anything about, lived by a man she thought she'd buried. Sit down, she says finally, before I decide to be angrier than I already am. He sits, and for a moment neither of them says anything at all. The silence isn't empty. It's full of 5 years of missions neither of them will ever be able to describe to anyone outside this room. Full of 100 small memories that only exist now in the two of them, since the men who could have corroborated most of it are dead for real, buried under headstones that actually mean something. Nolan, pulling her out of a collapsed stairwell in a city she still isn't allowed to name. Wren covering his exfil from a rooftop with a rifle she'd built herself out of spare parts because the official one had jammed. The two of them, 22 and 24, sharing the last ration bar in a unit that never had enough of anything except each other. She remembers, too, the one night neither of them ever talks about, a debrief that ran late. Too much adrenaline and too little sleep, a moment that could have become something else entirely if either of them had been brave enough to let it. They never spoke of it again. There wasn't room for it, not in a life built around disappearing on command. She wonders, looking at him now, whether he still thinks about it the way she sometimes does. In the quiet hours when the coffee shop is closed, and the apartment is dark, and the rifle in the closet feels less like a relic and more like a phantom limb. You look older, she says, because it's easier than saying anything true. You look like you've been hiding in a coffee shop for 3 years, he says. Which, I suppose, tracks. A ghost of a laugh escapes her, unexpected, the first real one in longer than she can remember. It fades fast. I'm running point on this, he says. Officially. Unofficially. I've been trying to find a way back to you for 2 years, and every door I opened got slammed shut by someone with more stars than me. Find me for what? To warn you. Because that word lands heavier than any of the others. Because warnings mean somebody's still hunting. And Wren spent 3 years telling herself the hunting had stopped. Telling herself the coffee shop and the graduate program and the whole quiet architecture of her new life meant she'd actually gotten away, actually earned some kind of peace. Warn me about what, Nolan? He slides the folder across the table. Doesn't open it for her. Makes her do that part herself, like he already knows what it's going to cost her and doesn't want his fingerprints. On the moment, the way a man stands back from a door he knows is about to swing hard. She opens it. A photograph. Grainy, gray, time-stamped 6 days ago. A cargo ship off the Atlantic coast, hull rust-streaked, deck cluttered with containers stacked 3 high. And standing on the deck, half turned away from the camera but unmistakable to anyone who spent 18 years memorizing the exact set of those shoulders. Her breath stops in her throat. That's not possible. That's what I said. 3 times, before I believed it. Because the man in the photograph is dead. Because she watched her mother fold a flag into a triangle over his coffin on a gray morning 8 years ago that smelled like rain that never fell. Because she spent 8 years building a version of herself, hard enough to survive without him, and that version doesn't have room for the ground opening up like this, twice in one day, twice in one lifetime. That's my father. I know. My father is dead. Is he? And there it is. The question she's spent 8 years refusing to ask out loud. Sitting across the table from her now with a coffee going cold and a scar on his jaw that shouldn't exist either. Because if Nolan can fake a death and walk back through a door 3 years later, then so can anyone. Then so, God help her, can he? She stares at the photograph until the edges of it blur, until the man's shoulders stop looking like a stranger's and start looking terribly unmistakably like the shoulders she used to lean against on a shooting range in Chesapeake. The shoulders that carried her on his back the whole half-mile home the summer she sprained her ankle running the tree line behind the house. How, she says. Just the one word. It's all she can manage. I don't know yet, Nolan says. What I know is this photo came from a source we've been cultivating for months. Someone with eyes on maritime shipping lanes up and down the eastern seaboard. It wasn't meant to surface. It surfaced anyway 6 days ago, and it's been sitting in a locked file since, waiting for someone with clearance high enough to decide what to do with it. And they decided to give it to you. They decided to give it to whoever could find you. His jaw tightens. Because whatever this is, Wren, it's bigger than one ambush on one recon team. Command's convinced the ambush and this photograph are connected. I'm inclined to agree with them. She needs air. Doesn't get it. The room's too small, the folder's too heavy, and Nolan's watching her with the kind of patience that means he already went through this exact collapse himself, alone somewhere, with nobody in the doorway to catch him the way he's trying to catch her now. Why now? She finally says. Why does this photo exist now, 6 days ago, after 8 years of nothing? Because somebody wanted it to exist. Nolan leans forward. Somebody wanted you to see it. Which means somebody wanted you looking in exactly this direction, at exactly this moment. Instead of looking at who set the ambush. Ping, pong. Two minds arriving at the same knife-edge conclusion in the same breath, the way they used to on the range, on the line in the back of a truck, with a man's blood on her hands and a war refusing to slow down long enough to let either of them think straight. It's a trap, she says. It's a trap, he agrees. And it worked. You're sitting in this building right now instead of pouring coffee in Norfolk. That's the whole objective. Getting you back in the room. Her stomach turns over. Because it worked. Because she walked right into it with her eyes open and her hands shaking and her father's ghost dragged out of the ground to make sure she would. Who? Wren says. Nolan pulls a second photograph from the folder. A man in a gray suit, silver at the temples, the kind of handsome that comes from money rather than mercy. Standing at a podium, a banner behind him reading Defense Innovation Summit in clean corporate letters. The kind of banner that photographs well for a press release nobody outside the industry will ever read closely. Julian Vance, Nolan says, runs a private contracting firm. Half the encrypted comms gear this base uses came through his company. Which means he'd know exactly which frequencies were supposed to be dead. Which means he'd know exactly how to make the SEAL team's ambush look like it came from a ghost unit nobody could trace back to him. She stares at the photograph until the man's face starts to blur. The way faces do when you stare too long at any single point. When your eyes stop seeing a person and start seeing only the shape of a threat. And my father? Nolan's jaw tightens. The scar along it goes white at the edge. The way old scars do when the man wearing them is holding something back. 8 years ago, your father filed a report, internal, about procurement fraud in a contract that funneled through a company that didn't have Vance's name on it yet, but had his fingerprints all over it. A shell layer, 3 companies deep, the kind of paper trail that only makes sense if you're trying very hard to hide who's actually getting paid. A pause. 2 weeks after that report was filed, there was an accident on a training range in North Carolina. The room tilts. You're telling me Vance killed my father. I'm telling you somebody made sure your father couldn't finish that report. Nolan's voice drops, careful now, like he's handling something that might go off in his hands. And I'm telling you that photograph from 6 days ago means somebody didn't finish the job as thoroughly as they thought they did. Silence stretches long enough to hurt, because 8 years is a long time to grieve a man who might have been alive the entire time. Because grief has a shape, and Wren built her whole life around that shape. The rifle in the closet, the discipline, the coffee shop apron worn like penance for a sin she never actually committed. And now the shape is wrong. Now the shape has a hole in it she doesn't know how to close. Why didn't he come for me? She says. So quiet it barely survives the space between them if he's alive. 8 years. Nolan. Why not one letter, one signal? Anything. Nolan doesn't answer right away. When he does, his voice carries something that sounds almost like guilt. The kind of guilt a man carries on someone else's behalf, because the person who earned it isn't in the room to carry it himself. Maybe because the only way to keep you safe was to make sure nobody, not Vance, not anyone, ever had a reason to look for you through him, which is its own kind of love, she supposes. The cruelest kind. The kind that costs 8 years, and a folded flag, and a daughter who spent a decade learning to breathe around a grief that was never real, learning to build a whole identity around a father she never got the chance to actually lose. She thinks about all the moments she almost let herself move on. A boyfriend in her 2nd year of graduate school, who wanted to meet her family, who she quietly stopped answering, rather than explain a father who existed as a folded flag in a box she couldn't open. A birthday 3 years ago, where she caught herself dialing her father's old number before remembering, mid-dial, that the line had been disconnected years earlier. Small private griefs that added up over 8 years into a version of herself, built entirely around an absence that, apparently, was never as absolute as she believed. She thinks, unbidden, of a conference room with no windows, of a man in a plain suit sliding a folder across a table, of 4 words repeated twice because repetition might make them mean something. This is for your protection. She'd assumed all this time that the protection was generic, standard procedure for anyone whose cover got burned. She wonders now, sitting across from a ghost who used to be her closest friend, whether that protection had a name attached to it, after all, whether somebody specific had asked for it. She closes the folder. Her hands are steady now, steadier than they have any right to be. She thinks, briefly, of her mother, the last time she visited, 6 months ago. A quiet Sunday afternoon in a small house outside Chesapeake that still has her father's reading chair in the corner, untouched, because her mother could never quite bring herself to give it away. Her mother doesn't know any of this. Doesn't know her daughter spent 5 years in a unit that doesn't exist. Doesn't know she was erased and reissued into a stranger's life. Doesn't know, as of this morning, that the man she buried might be walking around on a cargo ship somewhere off the Atlantic coast. Wren wonders, with a fresh and terrible ache, what she's going to tell her. Whether there's a version of this story that doesn't break her mother's heart twice, once for the lie, and once for whatever comes after it. Then we find him, she says, and we find Vance, and this time nobody erases anybody without me in the room. Delgado returns 20 minutes later to find them both hunched over a map. Wren's finger-tracing shipping lanes with the same certainty she used to trace bullet trajectories. Nolan feeding her coordinates like the last 3 years never happened at all. I take it you two know each other, Delgado says dryly. We used to, Wren says. Doesn't look up. Turns out used to doesn't mean what I thought it meant. Delgado sets a new file on the table, thinner than the last one. There's something else you need to see. Wren's stomach clenches before she even opens it, because today has already rewritten a death and resurrected a father, and there's a limit, surely, to how many times the ground can move in one afternoon. Inside, satellite images. A warehouse complex on the Virginia coastline, industrial, unremarkable, the kind of building nobody looks at twice, except for the shipping manifest steepled behind it, except for the company name stamped across every single one, Vance Maritime Solutions. That fragment from this morning's registry ping, Delgado says. We finished pulling the ownership chain. It leads straight back to the man in your second photograph. We've had eyes on this location for 2 days, Delgado continues. Since before the ambush, since a routine audit flagged irregular cargo movement. A beat. We think whatever your father was investigating 8 years ago never actually stopped. We think it just got bigger, quieter, and better funded. Nolan's eyes meet Wren's across the table. Then that's where we start, he says. Delgado brings in a third person before the conversation can go further. A civilian analyst named Reeve, younger than Park, glasses pushed up into hair that hasn't seen a comb since sometime yesterday. He's carrying a laptop like it's an extension of his own hands. You wanted everything on Vance Maritime, Reeve says, setting the laptop down and spinning it to face them. Here's it, which isn't much on the surface. Clean books, legitimate contracts with 3 separate branches of the military going back over a decade. On paper, Julian Vance is exactly what he looks like. A defense contractor who got rich doing unglamorous, necessary work nobody else wanted to bid on. And underneath the paper? Wren asks. Reeve's mouth twists. Underneath the paper, his company's margins don't add up. He's been quietly hemorrhaging money on a communications contract that fell through 2 years ago. A contract that would have made him one of the primary suppliers for next-generation encrypted battlefield comms across the entire Atlantic fleet. When it collapsed, it should have bankrupted him inside 18 months. It didn't. And nobody's been able to explain where the replacement revenue came from. Reeve taps the screen. Except now we've got a ghost frequency showing up in an ambush 40 miles off the Virginia coast, using cryptographic architecture almost identical to a program he pitched and lost 2 years ago. Nolan leans over the laptop, studying the numbers with the same careful precision he used to bring to a target briefing. Any chance this is just bad luck? A coincidence of timing? In my experience, Reeve says, when a man's finances stop making sense at the exact moment a classified program resurfaces in the hands of his enemies, that isn't coincidence. That's a business plan. Wren feels the shape of it settling into place, piece by piece, the way a rifle scope settles onto a target after a long, patient hold. He's selling what he couldn't sell legally, she says. That's my read, Reeve agrees. Black market comms tech built on stolen architecture, sold to whoever's willing to pay enough to keep his real business afloat. She sits with that for a moment, turning it over, testing it against everything else she's learned tonight. A man desperate enough to hide financial ruin behind a facade of legitimate contracts. Desperate enough, 8 years ago, to silence a whistleblower, rather than let a report reach the wrong desk. Desperate men make dangerous, predictable choices, her father used to say. The trick is figuring out which desperation they're running from before they figure out you're the one hunting them. And the ghost frequency, Nolan says slowly, isn't stolen from a random source. It's stolen from Whisper Actual specifically. How specifically could someone even get that architecture? Wren asks. That program wasn't just classified. It was compartmentalized down to a handful of names. Fewer than a dozen people ever had full access to the cipher stack. Which is exactly what worries me, Nolan says. This isn't some contractor who got lucky reverse engineering a leaked spec sheet. Whoever built this had to have touched the actual architecture. Which means either someone inside that dozen sold it, or someone inside that dozen is still alive and working for Vance directly. Wren finishes. The two of them sit with that for a moment, the weight of it settling into the room like smoke. Because a dozen names is a short list. And Wren can count on one hand how many of those names she's certain are actually dead. Wren looks down at the photograph of her father one more time. At the shoulder she used to lean against on a shooting range in Chesapeake. At the man who taught her to hold her breath between heartbeats and let the rifle answer. No, she says. That's where I finish it. Delgado studies the two of them for a long moment, the way a commanding officer studies a plan she isn't sure she trusts yet. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. Small footprint. I can authorize a limited operational window, but I need eyes on that warehouse before anyone gets close enough to breach it. Give me 48 hours, Wren says. I want to know everything about this building before I set foot near it. Entry points, guard rotations, whatever Vance is using it for beyond shipping. 48 hours is a long time to sit on actionable intelligence, Delgado warns. 48 hours is the difference between a clean operation and a body count, Wren says. I've watched people rush this exact kind of op because command got impatient. I buried 3 of them. Delgado doesn't argue further. Just nods, the particular nod of someone recalculating how much authority she's willing to hand a woman she met 6 hours ago. You'll have your window, she says. I'll pull satellite tasking and put a team on pattern of life analysis starting tonight. She pauses at the door. And you'll need bodies on the ground for the breach itself when it comes. I'm assigning 2 of my best. Petty officers Ruiz and Hale. Young but sharp. They'll meet you at 0600. They arrive an hour later, both of them barely into their 20s. Both of them looking at Wren with the particular skepticism of soldiers who've spent their entire careers inside a system that runs on rank and record, neither of which she currently possesses on paper. No offense, ma'am, Ruiz says, arms crossed, but command's asking us to take orders from a civilian barista. No offense taken, Wren says. Ask me anything you actually want answered instead of dancing around it. Ruiz hesitates, then doesn't. How do we know you're not going to get us killed? It's a fair question. She respects more than she'd respect blind deference. You don't, she says. You know I calculated an intercept solution this morning that pulled 2 men out of the water alive, when your own systems had already written them off. That's the only proof I've got, and it's going to have to be enough, because I don't have time to earn your trust the slow way. Hale, quieter, watches the exchange without joining it, the way careful young operators learn to watch before they speak. My granddad served with a unit like yours, he says finally. Never talked about it. Just got this look sometimes like he was somewhere else. A pause. You've got the same look. Something in Wren's chest tightens at that, the accidental accuracy of it. The way this kid saw in 30 seconds what most people in her life never noticed in 3 years. Yeah, she says quietly. I imagine I do. Ruiz, listening, softens slightly, some of the arms-crossed skepticism draining out of his posture. Look, ma'am. No disrespect meant. It's just everything we train on is different now. Drones, thermal networks, real-time satellite feeds. Half of what I hear about units like yours sounds like it's from a different war. It is a different war, Wren says. Doesn't mean the fundamentals changed. You can have every sensor in the world pointed at a building and still miss the one thing that matters, because sensors don't understand fear, and fear is what tells you when a plan's about to go wrong before the data catches up. She looks between the 2 of them. I'm not here to tell you your training's obsolete. I'm here because sometimes the newest technology in the world still needs someone in the room who's held a rifle long enough to know when the numbers are lying. Hale nods slowly, like he's turning that over and finding it heavier than he expected. Ruiz says nothing, but the skepticism in his eyes has shifted into something closer to calculation. Not trust yet, but the beginning of it. Nolan waits until Delgado leaves before he says the thing Wren can tell he's been holding since he walked through the door. There's something else. Something I didn't put in the folder. Of course there is. The 2 operators we pulled out of the water this morning, Coyle and Marsh. Command debriefed them an hour ago. Marsh remembers something odd right before the ambush started. A voice on an open channel, just for a second, before the jamming kicked in fully. Male, confident, said something like, let's see if she still answers. Wren's stomach drops through the floor. She, Nolan confirms. Which means this was never about Coyle and Marsh at all. They were bait. A trap built specifically to force a response only you could give, on a frequency only you'd recognize, using a call sign nobody but you would answer to. Ping, he knew I'd hear it. Pong, he was counting on it. She sits with that for a long moment, feeling the shape of the trap close fully around her for the first time. Not a coincidence, not bad luck, but a plan built with surgical precision around the exact contours of who she used to be. Somebody studied her. Somebody knew her old call sign, her old cipher, the exact frequency Whisper Actual used to run on, knew it well enough to bet an entire ambush on the certainty that she'd still remember it 8 years later. Whoever did this, she says slowly, didn't just know about the unit. They knew about me specifically, my training, my habits, the way I think under pressure. Which narrows the list of who could have built this considerably, Nolan says. How narrow? Narrow enough that it scares me. They step outside for air sometime past midnight. The hangar's fluorescent glare, Finally too much for either of them to sit under any longer. The tarmac is empty, quiet except for the distant hum of a generator and the low wash of waves somewhere out over the black water. Nolan lights a cigarette he clearly quit years ago, and clearly picked back up sometime during his 3 years of being dead. "I thought about looking for you," he says, not looking at her, "more than once. Every rule I was given said not to. I broke a lot of rules in 3 years. Never quite broke that one. Why not? Because if I found you and something happened to you because of it, I wasn't sure I'd survive that a second time." He exhales smoke into the dark. "I already buried you once, Wren. In my head, I mean. Wasn't sure I had it in me to do it twice." She doesn't know what to say to that. Doesn't trust herself to say anything at all, not with the weight of the day sitting on her chest. Her father's face in a grainy photograph. Nolan's voice thick with something she isn't ready to name. A warehouse full of secrets waiting somewhere down the coast. "Do you think he knew?" she asks instead. "My father. Do you think he knew what he was walking into, filing that report?" Nolan considers the question with the same careful weight he considers everything. "Your father was one of the most careful men I ever served under, secondhand as that service was. If he filed something that dangerous, it's because he'd already decided the danger was worth it. Men like that don't stumble into trouble. They walk into it with their eyes open, because somebody has to, and they've decided it's going to be them." That sounds like something he'd say about himself. Maybe that's where you get it from. The observation lands somewhere soft and unguarded in her chest, a place she hasn't let anyone touch in 3 years. She doesn't respond, just stands beside him in the cold, watching the water, letting the silence do the work neither of them has the words for. Delgado finds her alone a few minutes later, after Nolan's gone back inside to coordinate satellite tasking with Reeve. She doesn't say anything at first, just stands beside Wren at the edge of the tarmac, arms crossed against the cold. "Can I say something off the record?" Delgado asks. "You're going to whether I say yes or not." A thin smile. "Fair." The smile fades. "Be careful how much you trust him." "Reyes, I mean. I'm not saying he isn't exactly who he claims to be. I'm saying I've seen Command bring back exactly one ghost from that program before today, and it wasn't for sentimental reasons. People don't get reinstated out of nowhere right when a case like this breaks, unless somebody upstairs decided they were useful again." Wren feels something cold uncoil in her stomach, a thought she hadn't let herself finish thinking. "You think Nolan's compromised? I think you should ask yourself who benefits from putting the two of you back in a room together at exactly this moment," Delgado says. "That's all. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm telling you to keep your eyes open, the way you clearly already know how to do." She walks away before Wren can answer, leaving the question hanging in the cold night air, unresolved. Another thread in a night that already has too many of them. That night, Wren doesn't sleep in the barracks they offer her. She drives home instead, back to the apartment with the thesis papers still scattered across the kitchen table, back to a life that already feels like it belongs to a stranger she used to know casually. Dana is asleep on the couch, television murmuring to an empty room, a half-eaten bowl of cereal balanced on the armrest. Wren stands in the doorway for a moment, watching her roommate breathe, feeling a strange, aching tenderness for a life she isn't sure she gets to keep anymore. She doesn't wake her, just turns off the television, drapes a blanket over her, and slips down the hall to her room the way she used to move through hostile buildings. Quiet, deliberate, careful not to disturb anything that doesn't need disturbing. She opens the closet. The rifle is exactly where she left it, wrapped in an old blanket, tucked behind winter coats she never wears. In Virginia's mild cold, untouched for 3 years, except for the one night a month she takes it out just to clean it. Just to remember. Just to make sure her hands haven't forgotten what they were built to do. She unwraps it slowly, runs her fingers along the stock, feels the small nick near the trigger guard that's been there since she was 19, a scar the rifle carries the same way she carries hers. Her phone buzzes on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number, 3 words long, sent from a burner that will be dead by morning. He's watching now. No signature, no context. Just those 3 words, glowing in the dark of her room, and a cold certainty settling into her chest that whoever sent them knows exactly where she's standing right now, tonight, in an apartment that was supposed to be invisible. Her first instinct is to call Nolan. Her second instinct, colder and more disciplined, stops her hand halfway to the phone. Because if Delgado's right, if there's even a fraction of a chance, Nolan isn't entirely who he claims to be, then broadcasting her fear to him tonight would be handing a stranger exactly the information he might be waiting for. She calls Delgado instead. "Someone just texted me," Wren says, keeping her voice level even as her pulse hammers. "Burner number, 3 words. He's watching now." A pause on the line, the sound of Delgado sitting up somewhere, fully awake in an instant. "Forward it to Reeve. He'll trace what he can, though I'd guess whoever sent it is already 3 burners ahead of us." "You'd guess right. Stay where you are. I'll have a car outside your building in 10 minutes. No. The word comes out harder than she means it to. If I run now, whoever's watching learns I'm rattled. I'd rather they think I didn't even flinch. Delgado is quiet for a moment, weighing the risk the way a commander weighs every risk against the mission, against the person, against the version of the plan that keeps the most people breathing. 10 minutes, she says finally. Non-negotiable. I'm not losing you to a burner phone the same day I got you back. Wren doesn't argue further, just hangs up and sits very still in the dark, listening to her own heartbeat, the way her father taught her to listen for anything at all that might tell her which direction the danger was actually coming from. She doesn't sleep in the minutes she has left alone, sits instead on the edge of her bed, with the rifle across her knees, running through everything Nolan told her, everything Delgado showed her, turning it all over the way her father taught her to turn over a stalled shot, not with panic, but with method, looking for the one variable she missed. Because someone built a trap specific enough to know her old cipher. Because someone had access to files that should have been sealed 8 years ago, along with her own identity. Because someone wanted her father's photograph to surface at precisely this moment, precisely calibrated to pull her back into a world she'd spent 3 years convincing herself she'd escaped. Which means this isn't just about Vance's money, or Vance's contracts, or Vance's fear of a report finally catching up to him after 8 years of silence. This is about someone who understands Whisper Actual from the inside, someone who knows its ciphers, its call signs, its people, well enough to weaponize all of it against the one operator still capable of answering. And there's only a handful of people alive who'd know all of that. She thinks of Nolan's face when he said, "Narrow enough that it scares me." Tian understands, finally, exactly what he meant. She thinks, too, of Delgado's warning on the tarmac, "Be careful how much you trust him," and hates that some small, cold part of her mind has already started running the calculation, cataloging Nolan the same way she catalogs strangers in a coffee shop. Height, hands, motive. She hates that 3 years of hiding taught her to suspect the people she loves as easily as she suspects everyone else. Somewhere out there, in a warehouse on the coastline, a man who ruined her family's life 8 years ago is sitting on evidence that could finally end this. Somewhere out there, her father is alive, has been alive this whole time, has let her grieve him for 8 years, rather than risk the alternative. She doesn't know yet whether to be angry at him for that, or grateful, maybe both. Maybe grief doesn't work in clean categories, no matter how disciplined you are, no matter how many years you spend training yourself to compartmentalize everything else. She thinks, too, about tomorrow's timeline. The 48 hours she promised Delgado, the pattern of life analysis that will start compiling the moment satellite tasking comes online. The 2 young operators who'll be waiting at the warehouse's edge with more courage than experience. She thinks about Nolan, about the weight of Delgado's warning, sitting uneasily beside 8 years of shared history that used to mean something absolute. She thinks about her father's voice, patient and certain on a wet range in Chesapeake, telling her that discipline isn't about pulling the trigger. It's about not pulling it, about waiting, watching, gathering every scrap of information available before committing to an action that can't be undone. She intends to follow that lesson tomorrow, whatever it costs her, because the version of herself who used to answer to Commander is still there, apparently, underneath 3 years of oat milk lattes and careful forgetting. And tonight, for the first time since a folded flag landed in her mother's hands, that version doesn't feel like a ghost she buried. It feels like a woman waking up. 9 minutes later, headlights sweep across her bedroom's ceiling. A car idling at the curb, engine running low, waiting. She watches through the gap in the curtains, long enough to confirm it's exactly who it's supposed to be. A black sedan, government plates. A driver she doesn't recognize sitting perfectly still behind the wheel. Before she lets herself exhale, she packs quickly. Doesn't take much. A change of clothes. Her father's old rifle, wrapped carefully in its blanket, the closest thing to armor she has left. A framed photograph from her nightstand. Her and her mother, taken the summer before everything fell apart, before caskets and flags and 8 years of careful, deliberate forgetting. Dana stirs on the couch as Wren moves through the living room, blinking blearily against the hallway light. "Wren, where are you going?" Wren freezes for half a second, the old lie already forming on her tongue, the same practiced smoothness she's used 1,000 times in 3 years. Family emergency. Work trip. Something forgettable. Something that won't invite follow-up questions. Except tonight the lie doesn't come as easily as it used to. Something came up, she says instead, which is at least closer to true than anything else she could offer. "I might be gone a few days." Dana studies her for a long moment, something uncertain crossing her sleepy face. Exactly. Just the quiet recognition of a friend sensing a wall she's never been allowed past. "You'll call me if you need anything?" "I will," Wren says, and means it, and hates, faintly, how rare it is that she gets to mean something like that without calculating the risk first. She lets herself hug Dana quickly, fiercely, before slipping out into the cold night air, down the stairwell, into the waiting car. The driver doesn't speak, just pulls away from the curb the moment her door closes, headlights cutting through empty streets, toward a hangar that isn't supposed to exist, toward a life she isn't sure she's ready to fully step back into, toward a father she hasn't seen in 8 years, and a warehouse full of answers she's about to go looking for whether the world is ready to give them to her or not. Because tomorrow, she's not pouring coffee. Tomorrow she's going back to war. And this time, she isn't entirely sure which ghosts are actually on her side. But she knows, at least, which ones she's willing to fight for, tooth and nail, all the way to the end of it. And that, tonight, standing on the edge of everything she thought she'd buried for good, is enough reason to move forward on. Warehouse sits low and gray against the Virginia coastline, the kind of building designed to be forgotten, chain-link fence, faded signage. A parking lot with exactly enough cars to look legitimate, and not one car more. Wren watches it through a rifle scope from 400 meters out, prone in the wet grass, Nolan beside her, with a spotting scope and a silence that says he already knows what she's thinking before she says it. 48 hours of pattern of life analysis laid out on a tablet between them. Guard rotations logged to the minute, delivery trucks timed. A rhythm to the building's life that Wren has memorized, the way she used to memorize wind charts. 3 guards on rotation, she murmurs. 2 at the gate, 1 roaming. Cameras, 4 visible. Assume more. Because assuming less gets people killed. Because her father taught her that on a ranged SFET before she was old enough to vote. And some lessons don't fade even after 8 years of thinking the teacher was in the ground. Her earpiece crackles. Delgado's voice, tight with the particular tension of someone running an operation from 3 states away. "Halloway, confirm you're a go." Wren's finger rests along the trigger guard. Not on it. Not yet. Confirmed beside her, Nolan studies the building through his own optics, silent for a long moment before he speaks. 48 hours of watching this place and I still can't find a weak point in their rotation. Whoever's running security here trained somewhere real. Or trained here, Wren says. Voss built comms architecture. He could have built physical security protocols too, before any of this started. You think he's inside. I think we're about to find out. She runs the mental checklist one more time. The same checklist her father drilled into her before every op that mattered. Entry points, fallback positions, the location of every teammate relative to every threat. Ruiz and Hale's heat signatures glow faint green in the corner of her scope's overlay, steady at the tree line. patient despite the nerves she knows are eating at both of them. Nolan's breathing beside her, slow and even, the rhythm of a man who's done this 100 times before and will do it 100 times again if the mission demands it. The last guard on the roaming patrol crosses behind the east wall, exactly on schedule, exactly as the pattern of data predicted it. She watches to the second hand on her mental clock, counting down the 90-second window that's about to open. Ruiz, Hale, she says quietly into the mic. On my mark. Ruiz and Hale hold position at the tree line, 40 yards to the east. Both of them checked and rechecked their gear twice already in the last hour out of nerves neither one will admit to. You good? Hale asks quiet. I'm fine, Ruiz says. Then after a beat, you? Fine. Neither of them is fine. Wren can see it even from here. The too tight grip on a weapon, the too fast breathing. She keys her mic low. Ruiz, Hale, breathe with me for a second. A pause, then grudgingly, copy. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Half a breath, hold it, let it go slow. She lets the silence do some of the work the way her father used to. Fear's not the problem. Fear that runs your hands is the problem. Let it sit in your chest where it belongs and keep your hands doing what they're trained to do. A longer pause. Copy that, Commander, Hale says, and something in his voice has steadied. The plan is simple on paper, which means it will not survive contact, because plans never do, because her father used to say that too, usually right before something went sideways enough to prove it. Nolan goes in through the loading dock. Wren covers from the ridge. Ruiz and Hale flank the north entrance, ready to breach on Wren's mark, timed to a guard rotation that gives them a 90-second window and not a second more. Except plans don't account for a warehouse door opening 4 minutes early. Except they don't account for the roaming guard turning the wrong corner at the wrong second and locking eyes with a shadow that shouldn't be there. Except a single gunshot cracks across the water before anyone's ready for it, and Wren's whole body goes cold and precise at once. The panic and the discipline arriving together the way they always did in the field. Contact, she breathes into the mic. North entrance, go, go, go. Through her scope, she watches the roaming guard drop into a defensive crouch, shouting something toward the gate that she can't make out over the distance and the wind. A second guard breaks from his post to respond, weapon raised, and for one terrible second the whole careful 90-second window collapses into chaos. Guards converging on a position Ruiz and Hale haven't even reached yet. Ruiz, Hale, hold at the tree line. Wren snaps. Do not advance until I clear that guard. Copy, Hale says, voice tight but steady. She adjusts her position, tracks the responding guard through her scope, factors range and angle, and the faint crosswind coming off the water in the half-second she has to do it. Her father's voice steady in her memory. Let the rifle answer. Chaos has a rhythm if you've lived inside it long enough. Wren's scope finds the guard before her conscious mind catches up to her hands. Exhale half, hold. The rifle answers exactly the way her father promised it would, all those years ago, and the guard drops before he finishes turning. One threat down. Radio chatter floods her ear. Nolan's voice, clipped, controlled, moving through the loading dock. Ruiz and Hale breaching the north door, their voices tighter than they were an hour ago but steady. Calling clears room by room the way they trained to, and underneath all of it, a second voice unfamiliar, cutting through the comms like it doesn't belong there. Because it doesn't. Because somebody's on their frequency. Cute plan, the voice says, smooth, amused. The kind of amused that comes from a man who's already 3 moves ahead. Commander Halloway, I was starting to think you'd never come. Her stomach drops through the ground. Vance, in the flesh. Well, a pause almost playful. Not literally in the flesh. I'm not nearly foolish enough to be standing where your rifle can reach me. Ping. Where's Reyes? Pong. Currently enjoying my hospitality. Less currently enjoying my patience, which is running thinner than I'd like. Her jaw tightens. Because of course. Because a plan built on 400 meters of solid ground was never going to survive a man who's been 3 moves ahead since before she even sat down in that comms room 3 days ago. Let him go. I will. The second you walk through that front door and hand over what your father left you. The words land wrong. Sideways. A puzzle piece jammed into the wrong shape. My father didn't leave me anything. Vance laughs, soft and unhurried. like he has all the time in the world and she has none. Then you haven't looked hard enough, which is a shame, because Nolan Reyes doesn't have that kind of time left. Ruiz's voice crackles over the comms, tight and controlled. Commander, North Wing's clear. No sign of Reyes on this level. There's a stairwell down. Looks like it goes to some kind of basement structure. Not on any of the blueprints we pulled. Copy, Wren says. Hold position. Don't breach without me. Copy that. Through the comms, she can hear the two of them working the space methodically, despite the adrenaline clearly humming through both their voices, clearing corners, checking angles, calling out clear rooms in the clipped shorthand they'd only recently started to sound natural using. Hale's breathing has steadied since the shots first rang out. Ruiz sounds sharper than he did an hour ago, the nervous edge burned away by the simple necessity of doing the job in front of him. Movement, Hale says suddenly, voice dropping low. East corner, wait, false alarm. Shadow from the equipment. Copy, Ruiz answers. Eyes forward. Wren listens to the exchange with something like pride, threading through the urgency. The sound of two young operators holding steady under exactly the kind of pressure that is people who could do this job from people who only think they can. She's already moving. Down the ridge, rifle slung, every trained instinct screaming that walking into a building alone is exactly the mistake that gets good soldiers killed. And doing it anyway, because Nolan died once already in her mind, and she is not about to let it become true twice. Because if her father can come back from the dead, then she is not losing anyone else to a grave that might be a lie. She's moving before she finishes deciding to. The warehouse door groans open under her hand. Inside, crates stacked to the ceiling, fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and a stairwell sole down into darkness, exactly where Ruiz said it would be unmarked, unmapped, the kind of construction that only makes sense if you're building something you never want an inspector to find. She descends slow, weapon up, every step deliberate, the way she was trained to move through hostile structures a lifetime ago. The stairwell opens into a second, larger room below the main floor. A room that shouldn't exist on any permit, filed with the county, lined with server racks and equipment humming quietly in the dark, and at the center of it, zip-tied to a support beam, a bruise blooming under one eye, very much alive and glaring at her like he's furious she came at all. You weren't supposed to, Nolan starts. Save it. Vance steps out from behind a bank of server racks like he's been rehearsing the entrance. Gray suit, unbothered, a pistol held loose and casual at his side. The posture of a man who has never once had to fire it himself. There she is, Vance says. The ghost the Navy keeps resurrecting. You killed my father. Your father made a mistake. Vance's voice stays even, reasonable, almost gentle, which is somehow worse than if he'd shouted. He found a discrepancy in a contract he was never meant to see, and decided the honorable thing was to report it. Do you know what honorable things cost, Commander? Apparently, everything. Apparently. A thin smile. I didn't want it to go the way it went. I want you to understand that. I had a company hemorrhaging money into a defense contract that was 2 years from bankrupting me. Your father's report would have ended everything I built, so I made a choice. Not a good one, not one I'm proud of, but a choice, and choices have consequences, and here we are. Where is he? Wren says, voice flat, dangerous. Is he alive? Something flickers across Vance's face. The first crack in the composure. He was supposed to be gone, cleanly, except your father is stubborn, and men like that have a habit of surviving things they shouldn't. A beat. He's been a problem for 8 years, quietly, from wherever he's hiding. And 6 days ago, he made contact with someone inside my organization, which means he made himself findable, which means you used a photograph of him to lure me here. I used a photograph of him, Vance says, to make sure you'd be standing exactly where I need you standing. Because the frequency your unit used, the one you resurrected 3 days ago to save those SEALs, that's not just a call sign, Commander. That's an encryption key. One that unlocks a decade of financial records I would very much like to see disappear. Tell me about the contract, Wren says. The one my father found. I want to hear you say it out loud. Vance studies her for a moment, then shrugs, almost casual. Like the confession costs him nothing now that he's already been caught. 3 shell companies. A subcontract for battlefield encryption hardware, that never actually shipped the components it was paid for. Your father found the discrepancy during a routine audit review. Should have taken him 10 minutes to flag and forget. Instead, he pulled the thread, kept pulling it, for weeks, quietly building a file that would have ended me and taken half my board down with it. His jaw tightens. 8 years of careful work, unraveled by one man who couldn't leave well enough alone. He was doing his job. He was destroying mine, Vance says. There's a version of this where he minds his own business and none of this happens. None of it. Not the accident, not the erasure, not tonight. I want you to sit with that, Commander, before you decide who the villain of this story really is. I don't need to sit with it, Wren says. You had a choice, same as he did. He chose to tell the truth. You chose to bury it under a body. Those aren't equivalent decisions. Whatever story you've told yourself to sleep at night for the last 8 years. Something in Vance's expression hardens at that, the reasonable mask slipping for just a moment into something colder underneath. We'll see how righteous you feel about it when this is over. You had help, Wren says. Someone from inside Whisper Actual. Someone who knew the cipher stack well enough to hand it to you. Vance's smile widens, unbothered by the accusation. You're closer than you think. A door at the back of the server room swings open. A man steps out, mid-50s, thinning hair, a face Wren almost doesn't recognize until the memory clicks into place with a sickening lurch. Voss. Master Sergeant Elias Voss, Whisper Actual's old signals specialist. The man who built half the unit's encryption architecture with his own hands. A man whose name appeared on the same casualty report as Nolan's 3 years ago. Another empty casket. Another folded flag. Elias, she breathes. Commander. Voss doesn't quite meet her eyes. I always wondered if they'd send you eventually. You're supposed to be dead. So are a lot of people in this room, Voss says, glancing at Nolan. Turns out the program was better at faking deaths than it ever was at taking care of the people it erased. No pension, no support. Just a new name and a warning never to use the old one again. His jaw tightens. Vance offered something the government never did. Money, a future. I took it. Wren studies him. This man she once trusted with her life, searching his for some sign of the operator she remembered. Steady, meticulous, the kind of quiet competence that made the whole unit feel safer just having him in the room. She finds traces of it still, buried under 3 years of whatever compromises got him to this basement. You had a wife, she says slowly, the memory surfacing. Kids. 2 of them, I think. Before all this, something in Voss's face cracks just slightly. Divorced. 2 years after I died. Turns out it's hard to explain to a family why their husband and father is legally deceased. His voice goes all flat, controlled, the sound of a man who's rehearsed this justification many times, mostly for himself. I don't expect you to understand. You still have your name, your rank, eventually, if you want it, back. I had nothing left to lose by the time Vance found me. Ping. You sold us out. Pong. I sold a program that already sold me out first. Wren feels something cold and furious rise in her chest. The particular fury of betrayal from someone who once covered her back in a firefight outside Kenda, who she trusted with her life 100 times over. Men died because of what you gave him. Men died the day the government decided our lives were worth erasing instead of honoring. Voss snaps back, some of the calm cracking. I didn't build the jamming architecture to hurt anyone. Vance wanted access to a testing bed for his black market comms tech. I gave him code. He's the one who decided to weaponize it into an ambush. Convenient distinction, Nolan mutters from the beam. Voss doesn't answer that, just looks away, jaw tight. The particular shame of a man who's run out of ways to justify himself even to his own reflection. And there it is. The whole shape of it, finally visible. Not an ambush for its own sake, a key. A woman turned into a password without her knowledge, hunted not for who she is, but for what her mind still carries in. And a betrayal that started years before today, in the quiet cruelty of a program that erased its own people and called it protection. You want me to hand you my father's evidence, she says slowly, in exchange for a man you already tried to kill once. I want this to be simple, Vance says, for both of us. He gestures with the pistol toward a bank of monitors along the far wall, each one displaying a different feed. The loading dock, the north entrance, a live view of Ruiz and Hale still working their way down the stairwell. You should know I've been watching this whole operation unfold in real time. Every move you made tonight, I anticipated. The 48 hours you spent on pattern of life analysis, I let you have them. I wanted you confident when you walked in here. Confidence makes people predictable. If you anticipated everything, Wren says, then you know I'm not walking out of here without both of them. I know you'll try. Something almost admiring crosses his face. Your father had that same stubbornness. I respected it in him, even while I was destroying his career for having it. I imagine I'll respect it in you too, right up until it gets you killed. Ping. It's not going to be simple. Pong. Then it's going to be short. He raises the pistol. Everything narrows to a single, impossible second. Because Wren doesn't have her rifle raised. Because the angle is wrong. The room too close. The distance nothing like the 400 meters she trained her whole life to master. Because every instinct her father built into her, over 18 years of quiet mornings on a Chesapeake range comes down, right now, to something much smaller and much faster than a rifle ever taught her to be. She doesn't aim. She reacts. The sidearm at her hip clears its holster before her brain finishes the thought. And the shot that leaves it isn't the clean, patient, 400-meter shot her father spent a lifetime perfecting in her. It's close, ugly, desperate. It's enough. Vance drops the pistol before he can fire it, a scream tearing out of him as his shoulder buckles. And for one suspended moment, the whole server room goes silent except for the ringing in Wren's own ears and the low electric hum of the racks around them. She did that. Not Nolan. Not Ruiz and Hale thundering down the stairwell 30 seconds too late to matter. Her. Nolan stares at her from the support beam, disbelief, and something close to pride cutting through the pain on his face. Guess you didn't need saving after all. Guess I never did. Ruiz and Hale flood the room seconds later, weapons up, and Vance is on the floor clutching his shoulder, cornered and cursing, and very much alive to face what comes next. Because that's the point. Because her father's ghost doesn't get to become another closed casket that nobody has to answer for. Cuff him, Wren says. Boss too. And somebody get Reyes out of those ties before I do it with my knife and take his hand off by accident. Nolan huffs something close to a laugh. Romantic as ever. Hale moves toward Voss carefully, almost gently. The way you handle something you don't fully understand yet. Sir, hands where I can see them. Voss doesn't resist. Just lets his shoulders drop, the fight already gone out of him, replaced by something closer to relief. It's over, he says quietly, to no one in particular. Finally, Delgado's voice crackles over the comms, breaking through the aftermath. Halloway report. We've got local law enforcement staged 2 minutes out and a full evidence team behind them. Talk to me. 2 hostiles secured, Wren says. Vance and a former Whisper Actual Signals officer named Voss. Reyes is alive. I need medical for Vance's shoulder, and I need every server in this basement imaged before anyone touches a cable. Copy that. Good work, Commander. Commander. The word doesn't land like a threat this time. It lands like something closer to home. 20 minutes later, the warehouse is crawling with people who weren't there an hour ago. Evidence, technicians in windbreakers, documenting server racks, local police, holding a perimeter they clearly don't fully understand the significance of. And Delgado herself, arriving in person for the first time since the hangar, moving through the wreckage of the operation with the brisk efficiency someone finally allowed to see the endgame she's been managing from a distance. The financial records on those servers, Delgado says, studying a tablet one of her analysts hands her. Reeves already pulling threads. Looks like your father's original report barely scratched the surface. Vance has been running this operation for the better part of a decade, growing quieter and more careful every year since the report almost caught him the first time. And Voss? Full confession, apparently. Practically volunteered it the second the cuffs went on. I think some part of him wanted to get caught. Delgado studies Wren for a moment. How are you holding up? Ask me again in a week. Fair enough. Delgado's mouth twitches, almost a smile. For what it's worth, whatever happens with the reinstatement paperwork, you did exactly what that program used to claim it trained people to do. You just did it without a program behind you this time. They walk Vance out first, cuffed, pale, muttering something about lawyers that nobody in the room bothers to answer. Voss goes next, quieter, his eyes fixed somewhere on the middle distance. A man already rehearsing whatever version of the truth he'll tell investigators in the hours to come. Wren stays behind long enough to look at the server racks one more time, at the architecture Voss built, the same bones as the system her father helped design decades earlier, twisted now into something that got 2 men shot on a boat 40 miles offshore and nearly cost her everything all over again. Nolan limps up beside her, rubbing his wrists where the zip ties bit in. For what it's worth, he says, I didn't know about Voss. I want you to hear that from me before you hear it from anyone else. I know, Wren says. Delgado warned you about me, didn't she? Wren doesn't answer right away. Doesn't need to. The silence says enough. I don't blame her for asking the question, Nolan says quietly. I'd have asked it too in her position. Doesn't mean it didn't sting a little, knowing you had to wonder. I stopped wondering about an hour into that room, Wren says. The second Voss stepped out of that door. That was never you, Nolan. I should have trusted that faster than I did. He doesn't say anything to that. Just nods once. The particular nod of a man accepting an apology he didn't ask for but needed anyway. Later that night, back at the hangar, Wren finally makes the call she's been putting off since the moment she left her apartment. Dana picks up on the second ring, voice thick with sleep and worry. Wren? Oh my God, are you okay? You said a few days, it's been… I'm okay, Wren says, and means it. For once without having to calculate the lie first. I'm sorry. I know I've been strange the last few days, weeks honestly. There's a lot I haven't told you. A pause on the line. You don't owe me your whole life story, Dana says carefully. But if there's something going on, something dangerous, I'd rather know than not. Wren closes her eyes, feeling the weight of 8 years of careful compartmentalization, pressing against a decision she isn't sure she's ready to make yet. There's a lot I still can't tell you, she says finally. Some of it maybe never, but when I get back, I'll tell you what I can. I promise. Okay, Dana says, and there's something steadying in how simply she accepts it. No interrogation, no demand for more than Wren can give. Just, come home safe. Whatever it is, I will. She hangs up, sits for a moment in the quiet, feeling something in her chest loosen slightly that's been tight for longer than she can remember. Ruiz finds her in the hangar's mess area the next morning, 2 cups of terrible government-issue coffee in hand, one of which he sets down in front of her without asking. Figured you'd know good coffee from bad, he says, given your, previous profession. This is bad, Wren confirms, taking a sip anyway. Genuinely terrible. He laughs, some of the tightness from the last few days finally draining out of his shoulders. Wanted to say thanks for the breathing thing. Back at the warehouse, he hesitates, searching for the right words. I've done breach ops before. Never had someone talk me through the fear part before. Usually it's just, suck it up, move faster, don't think about it. Not thinking about it just delays it, Wren says. It comes back later, usually at a worse time. Usually louder than if you'd let it sit with you in the moment. Hale joins them a minute later, sliding into the seat beside Ruiz with the particular ease of 2 people who've been through something together and come out the other side closer for it. Command's talking about a commendation for the op. He shrugs, a little embarrassed by the idea. Feels weird, taking credit for something that mostly involved standing where you told us to stand. Standing exactly where you're told, under fire without breaking, Wren says, is most of what this job actually is. Don't undersell it. The 3 of them sit together for a while after that, not saying much, just letting the quiet do what quiet does after something that intense. Settle, slowly, into something survivable. 3 weeks later, the Chesapeake Range looks the same as it always has. Wet grass. Gray sky low over the water. The kind of quiet that used to feel like grief, and now, finally, feels like something closer to peace. Wren stands at the firing line, rifle steady, breath. And beside her, older, grayer, a new scar along one forearm that wasn't there 8 years ago. Grant Halloway watches his daughter shoot the way he taught her. 8 years and a fake death and a warehouse gunfight later, like no time has passed at all. He'd surfaced 2 days after the raid, quietly, through channels. Wren still doesn't fully understand, escorted onto the base by officers who seemed to already know exactly who he was and exactly how careful they needed to be about it. The reunion in Delgado's office had been quiet. wordless for the first several minutes. Her father's arms around her, tighter than she remembered them ever being, both of them shaking in a way neither wanted to name out loud. She remembers standing in that office doorway, seeing him for the first time in 8 years, and feeling the whole architecture of grief collapse at once, not gently, not with relief, but violently, the way a building collapses when the load-bearing wall finally gives out. He looked older than the photograph, grayer, a new scar along his forearm that told its own untold story. One more chapter in 8 years she hadn't been allowed to witness. They hadn't talked much those first 2 days, just sat together in careful, cautious silence, relearning the shape of each other's presence, both of them aware that the real conversation, the one about why, about how, about 8 years of a lie so complete it had a headstone, was still waiting, unavoidable, somewhere just past the edge of what either of them was ready to say out loud. She'd chosen the range for it, in the end, the one place that had always belonged to both of them equally, long before Whisper Actual, long before Vance, long before any of it. If the truth was going to break something between them, she wanted it to break here, on ground that had already survived so much. They drive out together that morning, her father quiet in the passenger seat, watching the Virginia countryside slide past the window, with the particular attentiveness of a man who spent 8 years denying himself the simple pleasure of an ordinary drive. "I used to imagine this," he says eventually, breaking the silence. "Driving out to the range with you, after, if there ever was an after. I didn't let myself imagine it very often. Made the waiting worse." "How did you watch?" Wren asks. "All those years. How do you watch your own daughter's life from a distance and not go out of your mind?" "Carefully," he says. "Through people I trusted with almost nothing except very specific, narrow questions. Is she safe? Is she well? Nothing more than that, because anything more risked someone connecting threads that needed to stay disconnected." His hands tightened slightly on his knees. "I knew about the coffee shop, the graduate program. I didn't know about Dana or your thesis or any of the small things that actually make up a life. I only ever got the bare facts. Enough to know you were alive. Never enough to know you. That sounds lonely. It was the loneliest 8 years of my life," he seizes simply. "And I'd do it again, exactly the same way, if it meant you stayed breathing." She doesn't respond to that right away. Just drives, watching the road, feeling the weight of a devotion so absolute it had been willing to cost both of them everything, rather than risk losing the other permanently. "You didn't need to come back for me," Wren says now, not looking away from her target. "You could have stayed hidden, stayed safe." "I could have," her father agrees. "But I spent 8 years watching from a distance while my daughter carried a war I started. That's not safety. That's just a different kind of cowardice." She lowers the rifle, looks at him properly for the first time since the hangar, since Vance. Since the whole world cracked open and gave her back a father she'd already grieved and a version of herself she'd buried on purpose. "There's something I need to ask you," she says, "and I need you to answer it honestly, whatever it costs." He meets her eyes. Doesn't flinch. "Ask." "The erasure. 3 years ago, when they scrubbed my file and gave me a new name and told me it was standard procedure." She pauses, steadying her voice. "Was that standard procedure? Or was that you?" For a long moment her father says nothing, just looks out at the water the way he used to look at the tree line behind the house, like he's bracing for something he can't quite name. "It was me," he says finally. "I made contact through a back channel I still had access to 8 years after I was supposed to be gone, and I told them exactly what would happen to you if Vance ever traced a living daughter back to a dead man's unfinished report. I asked them to erase you, not to punish you, to hide you, the only way I still had power to do it." Wren's throat tightens. "You did that. I did that." His voice is steady, but his eyes aren't. "I took away your name, your rank, everything you'd earned, because it was the only shield I had left to give you. I don't expect you to forgive that easily. I'm not sure I've forgiven myself for it." Wren stands with that for a long moment, feeling the last piece of the puzzle settle into place. Not with anger, though anger is in there or something, tangled up with everything else. Mostly what she feels is a kind of exhausted, aching recognition, the same discipline, the same willingness to sacrifice everything, including the people who loved him, for the sake of protecting them. I'm not angry anymore, she says. Quiet, certain. I thought I would be, but I'm not. I understand it. That doesn't mean it didn't cost me 8 years I can't get back. No, he agrees. It doesn't. He nods once, doesn't trust his voice enough to say anything further, and for a moment they just stand together at the firing line. Two people who spent 8 years grieving each other for reasons that turned out to be exactly backward. There's something else, he says finally, voice rough. Something I owe you beyond an apology. What? A choice. A real one this time. Not one made for you, behind your back. Out of fear. He turns to face her fully. You can walk away from all of this. From the Navy, from Whisper Actual's ghost. From everything Vance dragged back up. Nobody would blame you. You've more than earned the right to a quiet life. Is that what you want for me? What I want, he says slowly, is for you to choose it yourself. Whatever it is. Not because someone else had decided it was safer. I already made that mistake once. I'm not making it again. Wren looks out at the water, feeling the weight of an actual choice settle into her hands for what feels for the first time in 8 years. Not a role assigned to her. Not an identity built for her by strangers in a windowless room. But something she gets to decide entirely on her own terms. I know what I want, she says finally. Tell me. Behind them, a group of young recruits at the edge of the range, nervous, eager, the same age Wren was, when her father first pressed a rifle into her hands and taught her to let it answer. Nolan leans against the fence post nearby, arms crossed, watching with the quiet satisfaction of a man who finally gets to stop pretending he's dead. Ruiz and Hale stand a little apart from the recruits, no longer skeptical, watching Wren something closer to the respect she never asked for and slowly, quietly earned. You could come back, Delgado had told her, the day the paperwork cleared. Full reinstatement. Commander, same as before. Wren had thought about it, really thought about it. Then she'd said no. That, she tells her father, nodding toward the recruits. I want that. He follows her gaze, studying the nervous young faces at the edge of the range, and something in his expression softens into a kind of pride she hasn't seen directed at her since she was 17 years old on this exact stretch of grass. Teaching, he says. Teaching, she confirms. Because the uniform never fit the way people assumed it did. Because some of me belongs to this range now, to making sure the next generation doesn't have to bury a father twice before they turn 30. She pauses, thinking of Voss, of a system that erased its own people and called it protection. And because somebody needs to build something better than what almost broke all of us. Might as well be me. Her father studies her for a long moment, something unreadable crossing his weathered face. Your mother's going to want to hear all of this from you directly, properly. Not secondhand, not through me. I know, I'm not looking forward to that conversation. None of us ever are, he says. Doesn't mean it isn't worth having. He's quiet for a moment, watching the water, before adding something softer. She kept your room exactly as it was, you know, all 8 years. I used to drive past the house sometimes late at night, just to see the porch light on. Never stopped, never went in. Just needed to know it was still standing. That some part of our life together hadn't been erased along with everything else. You could have knocked, Wren says, not unkindly. I could have. I told myself 100 reasons why I shouldn't, and every single one of them was really just fear wearing a more respectable coat. He meets her eyes. I don't want to make that mistake again. With you or with her. Whatever comes next, I want it done honestly. Even when honest turns out to be the harder road to walk. She turns to the recruits, raises her voice just enough to carry across the wind coming off the water. All right, she says, eyes on the target. Breathe with me. She takes a breath of her own before continuing, feeling the whole weight of the day, the reunion, the confession, the long drive out to this quiet stretch of grass, settle into something she can finally, actually carry, instead of something she has to hide from everyone she loves. The recruits fall into position, rifles raised, the particular nervous stillness of people, about to be tested for the first time. Wren walks the line slowly, adjusting a stance here, correcting a grip there, the same patient, exacting care her father once gave her on this exact stretch of wet grass. A young man near the end of the line flinches visibly at the first distant sound of another range's fire carrying across the water. Wren moves to him without hurry, crouches slightly to meet his eye level. First time out here? He nods, jaw tight with the effort of not looking embarrassed. Flinching's not weakness, she tells him. It's information. Your body's telling you something matters. The trick isn't making the flinch go away. It's learning to let it pass through you without it living in your hands. She adjusts his grip slightly, repositions his shoulder half an inch. Try again. Slower this time. He does. The shot lands wide, but steadier than the last one, and something in his posture eases at the small, incremental proof that he can, in fact, get better at this. She stops behind a recruit who reminds her, uncomfortably, of herself at 17. Skinny, stubborn, trying too hard to look unbothered by nerves that are written plainly across her shoulders. Discipline isn't about pulling the trigger, Wren tells her, quiet enough that only the two of them can hear it. It's about not pulling it. Every soldier who ever got somebody killed pulled the trigger too soon. The recruit nods, swallows, steadies her breathing the way she's been taught. Wren steps back, watches her take the shot, clean, controlled, patient, and feels something settle in her own chest that's been unsettled for 8 long years. Behind her, at the edge of the range, her father watches the whole exercise with an expression she doesn't have a word for yet. Pride, maybe, or something adjacent to it, the particular satisfaction of watching a lesson you taught, once carried forward into hands you never expected to hold it. Nolan catches her eye across the field and offers the smallest of nods, an acknowledgement of everything neither of them has said out loud yet and probably won't need to. The late afternoon sun catches the barrel of her father's old rifle, resting steady in her hands. And for the first time since a folded flag landed in her mother's hands, on a gray morning 8 years ago, the ghost in her chest finally goes quiet. Not gone. She doesn't think it will ever be fully gone. But quiet at last, in the way that only comes from finally knowing the whole truth of what you survived, and choosing, deliberately, to build something worth surviving it for. Somewhere behind her, she hears her father's low voice offering quiet correction to a nervous recruit's stance, the same patient cadence he used with her 20 years ago. Its exact patch of ground. And she lets herself smile at the sound of it. A lesson passed down, then passed down again. A small act of continuity in a life built mostly around erasure and secrecy for far too long. The recruits finish their round, rifles lower. A ragged, relieved round of laughter passes through the line. The particular laughter of people who just survived their first real test and came out the other side intact. Wren watches them, feeling something settle into place that she suspects will take years, not weeks, to fully understand the shape of a life rebuilt not around hiding, but around teaching, around making sure the next generation inherits something sturdier than secrets and closed caskets. It isn't the life she expected 3 years ago, pouring coffee behind a counter in Norfolk. It isn't the life she expected 8 years ago either, burying a father who was never actually gone. But it's hers, chosen this time with her eyes wide open, built on truth instead of the careful architecture of a lie she didn't know she was living inside. And for the first time in longer than she can remember, that feels like enough.